Hey everyone, happy Monday, happy New Year. Here's a look at the weekly weather outlook across the US and also some discussion about next week and potentially the rest of the month. Really, the story this week is going to be largely warm conditions for a lot of the US with a pretty active zonal pattern. So, not any significantly large storms like we've seen in weeks past, but just kind of a more generally active, albeit lower intensity storm systems through this week. So, if we look at our mid-level vorticity, kind of the spin of the atmosphere, we can diagnose some of these storms. We see a few individual storm systems. They can be a little more difficult to discern within these zonal patterns, but we have one across the eastern Great Lakes this morning that's going to be moving off, bringing some snow to the northeast. And then there's another system really across the Rocky Mountains there, ejecting out, and then another one coming into the western US. And as we kind of progress through what happens over the next 24 to 48 hours, we see storm number one moves out, storm number two comes in. This third system kind of comes in and phases in with this. Also has a piece of energy coming into California that kind of closes off. And I'll note that, these closed systems, especially sort of aiming off to the southeast, isn't going to bring a lot of direct energy to California. California, I'll talk about in a moment, has seen some incredible amount of rainfall and snowfall over the last week, really the last couple of weeks, along with, periods of high winds as well. Looks like a much more quiet pattern for the foreseeable future, but some continued rain and snow, albeit much lighter over the next couple of days here. As we head more into mid to late week, we see that sort of second system that phased in. We see another storm system coming into the Pacific Northwest. So sort of a series of, weaker to moderate storms in the Pacific Northwest. It'll bring a few feet of snow to the Cascades. For example, will bring some much needed snow, albeit lighter, for the northern and central Rockies as well. And as we go into later this week, we'll see that yet again another trough digs into the Pacific Northwest, and that's going to sort of meet up with this storm system. We'll see a deeper trough move across the central US, and that sort of sets the stage for a pretty significant ridge to build back into the west later this week. It's also going to create this more split flow pattern, which is kind of what we started off with earlier this winter back in November. And I think there's maybe some semblance in some of the longer range forecasts too that what we're seeing or about to see and potential indications into later this month is sort of replicating what we saw as we went from November into December, at least from some of the larger scale patterns. And then as we head into next week, just really quickly, it looks like we'll sort of stay in this split zonal flow, pretty warm. There'll be some periods of cold air in the Great Lakes and Northeast, but really most areas, including the Northeast and Great Lakes, will largely be above average. As we look at what's happening right now, a couple things to point out. We have a lot of flood and winter weather products across the Rocky Mountains, but especially the West Coast as well. We're still seeing some of that heavy rain and snow. That storm system number two is going to bring some wintry precipitation to the upper Midwest. And then another thing I'll call out too is it's been quite dry. We've had, periods of high winds, downsloping winds and things like that across a lot of the front range of the Rockies, from the northern down to the southern Rockies. And we have pretty dry conditions across a lot of the front range of the Rockies. And if we actually look at the drought conditions really quick, I want to point out that because of a lot of the significant rain we've seen across California, with that system back in November, and then what we've seen over the last couple of weeks with many inches of rain, we're actually seeing removal of pretty much the entirety of the drought across California, which is great. Still have a lot of drought issues across a lot of the Southwest and Four Corners region. And then for areas of the Texas Panhandle, we still have drought. If we look at our, one way we can look at the fuels, the grasses and the different combustible fuels, we do see that the way how dry these are and how apt they are to burning and the intensity, we do see that we have some values that are becoming a little bit higher. This is the climatology or the percentiles for the entire year. So we see values that are kind of in the 60s, 70 percentile, so a little bit higher. For this time of year, that's a little high, and we see some of these increasing as well. So what we're seeing from the Storm Prediction Center, which I'll cover in a moment, is a critical area for fire weather today across the Texas Panhandle, elevated concerns for the Front Range of Colorado and into New Mexico. I'm jumping around a little bit, but I do want to talk about, the atmospheric rivers. That's been a really big topic so far this winter. If we look at the last 7 days, we can see that what we saw across a lot of California wasn't as intense in the last few days, necessarily atmospheric rivers. There's still a lot of moisture coming in, but the way in which we measure atmospheric rivers, which is namely this integrated vapor transport, wasn't necessarily necessarily intense or long duration enough to get into a really high category of atmospheric river. But the thing I want to point out is over the next 7 days, both the GFS and the European model suite really don't have any discernible class of atmospheric rivers across the U.S. West Coast. This is sort of indicative of this split flow pattern. A lot more of the energy is being directed is that water vapor transport, the low level moisture transport is directed either further north into Canada or further south into Mexico. So definitely quieter for a lot of the West Coast, although we still will see, as I mentioned before, some lingering precipitation over the next 24 to 48 hours and some pretty good snowfall for the Cascades as well. Talked about the fire weather concerns, elevated to critical conditions. Another thing I want to point out from the Storm Prediction Center is that on Friday, we actually have a slight risk, an extended range slight risk for the southern Mississippi River Valley. I actually think Thursday, there could be a few strong storms down along this region as well. And if we go back to our forecast map, you'll see the reasoning for this. It's this midweek system that's originally down off the coast of California. It comes down. This is a pretty potent trough this far south. So this is going to be able to help draw in a little bit more moisture ahead of it from the Gulf and create some instability ahead of that. Thursday potentially could see some severe storms as well, but Friday's kind of the highlighted day right now. And as that lifts off, there'll be kind of continued chances for thunderstorms into the mid-Atlantic potentially as well into this weekend. Now, I want to cover a couple of things. If we look at the precipitation type, as I mentioned, we have some snow across the Northeast moving out over the next 24 hours, wintry mix over the Midwest, and then we see kind of continued periods of coastal rain and mountain snow for the Pacific Northwest and rain across California still. And then we see this area of low pressure, again, initially is creating these gusty west winds, which is creating the fire weather concerns where fuels are dry. We have this really dry air mass and strong winds this afternoon across Texas Panhandle and surrounding areas. And then as we head into this midweek by Thursday, you see this one area of low pressure kicking off. Those southerly winds will be able to affect some more of that moisture and instability to promote some of those potentially strong severe storms later Thursday and or Friday. That storm system lifts up again. It's really lifting, so it's bringing a lot of warm air advection. It's going to keep things warm for a lot of the Midwest and Northeast. If we look at our temperature anomalies, what we'll see is that a lot of these the areas of current cold across the Northeast will moderate very quickly as this next storm system comes in, brings in warm air advection. We see that really through much of mid to late week. Aside from things being a little bit cooler out west, we're going to see temperatures 5 to 10, upwards of 20 plus degrees above average for areas later this week. And that continues into this weekend. Again, a little bit cooler out west. And as we head into next week, it looks like things largely remain around or above average for a lot of the U.S. Could see some, patches, brief periods of cold air across the Northeast. As we get later into the period, we're going really far over the GFS where it doesn't have a lot of accuracy, but we're seeing a potential signal change. If we look at the next really 6 to 14 days, we see that above average temperatures are expected across a lot of the U.S. With precipitation a little bit more notable across the far northern stretches of the U.S. and the far southern stretches of the U.S., again, owing to the split flow pattern where the jet stream, polar jet stream is much farther north, subtropical jet stream is much farther south. One thing I want to mention too, Arctic oscillation, one of the ways we look at the polar vortex, right now it's pretty negative, expected to go more neutral. But one of the things I wanted to call out too is the long-range GFS, Madden Julian oscillation, gives us a sense of potential activity and blocking patterns and things like that. One of the things, arguments for why we saw such active conditions, for example, with really cold conditions across the Northeast and really active conditions across the Pacific Northwest in parts of December, was this really amplified 6, 7, 8 Madden Julian oscillation. This was a lot of convection across the Western Pacific. GFS two-week range forecast is beginning to show some signal that we go back more into this amplified. And you see that starting back where we were, I think this is back at the end of November, kind of indicates that we might be potentially going back into a similar trajectory. So we'll keep an eye on this, but I could see a scenario where we do sort of replicate what we saw from late November and into December, potentially happening again as we head into later this month. So more to come. That's what things look like right now.